Most people notice when someone loses their job, gets divorced, or faces public scandal. These dramatic falls from grace grab attention because they are obvious and immediate. But the real erosion of status happens in moments so small that they barely register in conscious awareness. A slight hesitation before speaking, a nervous laugh after making a point, the way someone sits when they think no one is watching. Status is not lost in the boardroom during the big meeting. It is lost in the elevator ride before the meeting, in the 30 seconds of small talk, in the micro-expressions that reveal internal state before words are exchanged. By the time the formal interaction begins, the hierarchy has already established itself through signals that operate below the threshold of recognition. Watch someone whose status is declining, and you will see the decay in details that seem insignificant. They explain their decisions more than necessary. They seek validation for choices they previously made without consultation. They laugh a beat too long at jokes that are not particularly funny. Each moment is tiny, forgettable, but collectively they broadcast a message that others interpret unconsciously. The elevator conversation reveals everything. When someone enters and immediately begins filling the silence with commentary about the weather, their weekend plans, or observations about office politics, they are signaling discomfort with their own presence. The confident individual enters the elevator and occupies the space without feeling compelled to justify their existence through constant communication. Notice who initiates small talk and who responds. Notice who feels responsible for maintaining conversational flow and who remains comfortable with natural pauses. These patterns reveal underlying assumptions about social hierarchy that the participants themselves may not consciously recognize. The handshake carries similar information. Someone whose status is secure offers their hand with consistent pressure and duration. Someone whose status is uncertain varies their grip based on the perceived importance of the person they are greeting. They grip too firmly with superiors, too gently with subordinates, revealing their internal mapping of social positioning. The cruelest aspect of status erosion is that those experiencing it rarely recognize it happening. They focus on maintaining their formal position while unconsciously signaling their internal insecurity through 1,000 small compromises. They continue to hold the same title, occupy the same office, and interact with the same people, but something fundamental has shifted in how they are perceived and treated. This shift begins internally before it becomes externally visible. When someone starts doubting their own authority, their body language begins to reflect that doubt. When they question their right to occupy space, they begin to take up less space. When they worry about being discovered as inadequate, they begin to over-explain their adequacy. The internal change precedes and creates the external loss of status. The process is gradual enough that each individual moment feels justifiable. Offering unsolicited context for a decision seems reasonable in the moment. Apologizing for a minor inconvenience feels polite. Seeking consensus on matters that previously required no consultation appears collaborative. But these behaviors accumulate into a pattern that others interpret as weakness, uncertainty, or diminished confidence. Status operates through social momentum. When someone is perceived as rising, others unconsciously adjust their behavior to align with that perception. They listen more carefully, defer more readily, and interpret ambiguous signals more favorably. When someone is perceived as declining, the reverse occurs. The same words carry less weight. The same suggestions receive less consideration. The same presence commands less attention. This creates a feedback loop that accelerates in either direction. Rising status generates behaviors that reinforce rising status. Declining status generates behaviors that reinforce declining status. Once the loop begins moving in a negative direction, it becomes increasingly difficult to reverse without conscious intervention and strategic adjustment. The workplace provides countless opportunities for these micro-erosions to occur. Someone who previously dominated meetings begins to wait for others to speak first. Someone who used to make decisions unilaterally starts polling the room for opinions. Someone who once commanded attention through presence begins filling silence with unnecessary words. Each adjustment seems minor and reasonable, but the cumulative effect reshapes how others perceive and interact with them. Consider the meeting dynamics more closely. The person experiencing status decline arrives early and arranges materials nervously, checking their phone repeatedly, adjusting their seating position. When others enter, they offer overly enthusiastic greetings, and make comments designed to demonstrate their preparation and engagement. The secure individual arrives precisely on time, takes their seat without ceremony, and waits for the meeting to begin without feeling responsible for managing others' comfort levels. During the meeting, the declining individual over-explains their points, provides excessive context for their recommendations, and seeks confirmation that others understand and agree with their contributions. They respond to questions with more information than requested and follow up their statements with phrases like, "Does that make sense?" or "What do you think?" The secure individual makes their points economically, answers questions directly, and allows their contributions to stand without requiring additional validation. Email communication reveals these patterns even more clearly. The person losing status sends longer messages, provides more background information, uses more qualifying language, and responds more quickly to incoming communications. They feel compelled to acknowledge every message immediately, even if no immediate response is required. Their subject lines become more detailed and apologetic. Their signatures become more elaborate, as if listing credentials might compensate for diminished presence. Phone calls follow similar patterns. The declining individual feels responsible for maintaining conversational flow, fills pauses with verbal filler, and tends to speak more rapidly as if rushing through their content before being interrupted. They end statements with upward inflection, turning declarations into implicit questions that seek approval or agreement. Technology has accelerated and made visible these previously invisible moments. Digital communication creates permanent records of hesitation, over-explanation, and status-seeking behavior that would have been forgotten in face-to-face interactions. Email threads reveal who defers to whom. Meeting recordings capture micro-expressions and vocal patterns. Social media posts document the progression from confident statements to approval-seeking questions. The most destructive behaviors are often those that feel most natural when confidence wavers. Seeking reassurance feels responsible rather than weak. Providing extensive justification feels thorough rather than defensive. Accommodating others' preferences feels considerate rather than submissive. The person engaging in these behaviors genuinely believes they are being professional, collaborative, and thoughtful. But observers interpret these behaviors through the lens of status dynamics rather than conscious intention. They do not see someone being collaborative. They see someone seeking permission. They do not see someone being thorough. They see someone being defensive. They do not see someone being considerate. They see someone being subordinate. The language patterns reveal the internal shift most clearly. High-status communication tends to be declarative and economical. Low-status communication tends to be qualified and elaborate. The person losing status begins to use more hedging language, more disclaimers, more requests for feedback on matters that previously required no external validation. I think we should consider potentially moving forward with this approach, but I would love to hear everyone's thoughts. Carries a completely different status implication than we're implementing this approach. Both statements might refer to the same decision, but they broadcast entirely different levels of authority and confidence. The linguistic shifts are subtle but consistent. The declining individual begins to use phrases like, "I was wondering if," "Would it be possible to," "I hate to bother you, but," and "Sorry for the confusion." They preface statements with unnecessary apologies and end them with unnecessary questions. They qualify their expertise with phrases like, "I could be wrong," or "in my limited experience," even when discussing areas where they possess genuine knowledge and authority. Conversational positioning also reflects status changes. The person experiencing decline tends to agree more frequently, even with points that contradict their actual opinions. They seek common ground obsessively, avoiding any position that might create conflict or disagreement. They laugh at others' jokes more enthusiastically and make fewer attempts at humor themselves, especially humor that might be perceived as challenging or provocative. The timing and rhythm of speech change as well. Status decline often manifests as speaking too quickly, as if the person fears being interrupted or losing the opportunity to make their point. They rush through their content without allowing natural pauses for emphasis or consideration. This creates an impression of nervousness and undermines the impact of whatever they are trying to communicate. Alternatively, some people experiencing status decline overcompensate by speaking too slowly and deliberately, as if carefully controlling their presentation will mask their internal uncertainty. This controlled delivery often sounds artificial and draws attention to the very insecurity it is meant to conceal. The timing of communication also reflects status positioning. High-status individuals respond to messages when convenient for them. They do not feel compelled to provide immediate acknowledgement of every communication they receive. Low-status individuals respond quickly, extensively, and often apologetically for any delay in their response. This creates a visible pattern in digital communication that reveals hierarchy more clearly than formal organizational charts. Response times, message length, and linguistic patterns create a map of actual power distribution that often differs significantly from stated authority structures. The phenomenon becomes more complex with modern communication platforms. Instant messaging creates real-time evidence of status dynamics through response patterns, emoji usage, and conversation initiation behaviors. The person experiencing status decline tends to initiate more conversations, use more emoticons to soften their communications, and provide more detailed explanations for routine requests. Social media behavior amplifies these patterns exponentially. The person losing status begins to post more frequently, seeking validation through likes and comments that they previously did not require. Their posts become more personal, more explanatory, more approval-seeking. They share more about their achievements, not from confidence but from insecurity about whether their value is being recognized. Video calls reveal additional layers of status signaling that were previously invisible in phone conversations. Camera positioning, background choices, and on-screen behavior all communicate status information. The person experiencing decline often positions their camera awkwardly, creating unflattering angles that unconsciously signal their discomfort with being observed. They choose backgrounds that attempt to impress rather than those that feel natural and confident. During video calls, declining individuals often look at themselves on screen more frequently than they look at other participants. This self-monitoring behavior is visible to others and creates an impression of vanity or insecurity. They adjust their appearance more frequently, smile more artificially, and use more exaggerated gestures to compensate for what they perceive as diminished presence through the digital medium. Personal relationships follow similar patterns. The partner who begins to over-explain their choices is signaling uncertainty about their right to make those choices autonomously. The friend who starts seeking approval for preferences they previously expressed confidently is revealing internal doubt about their social positioning within the relationship. These changes often occur during periods of external stress or transition. A career setback, health concern, financial pressure, or relationship difficulty can trigger internal uncertainty that manifests in status-eroding behaviors across all social contexts. The specific trigger may be confined to one area of life, but the behavioral changes affect perception and treatment in all areas. The most insidious aspect of this process is that well-meaning people often encourage the very behaviors that erode status. They praise someone for being humble when that person is actually displaying insecurity. They appreciate someone being collaborative when that person is actually seeking validation they previously did not require. They reward thoughtfulness that is actually defensive over-explanation. This social reinforcement can trap someone in a declining status spiral. When others respond positively to status-eroding behaviors, those behaviors get reinforced and amplified. The person experiencing status decline interprets the positive social response as evidence that their new approach is working, not recognizing that the warmth they receive is often tinged with pity or condescension. Friends and family members often contribute to status decline unknowingly by offering reassurance that reinforces insecure behaviors. When someone seeks excessive validation, the natural response is to provide it, but this creates dependency on external approval that further undermines internal confidence. The person becomes addicted to reassurance that they previously provided for themselves through competent action and secure self-assessment. Romantic relationships are particularly vulnerable to these dynamics. When one partner begins to lose professional or social status, they often compensate by seeking increased validation and support from their romantic partner. This can create an imbalance that affects the entire relationship dynamic. The partner who is providing constant reassurance may begin to feel drained or lose respect, while the partner seeking reassurance becomes increasingly dependent and insecure. Breaking this pattern requires recognizing it first, which is difficult because the changes feel reasonable and justifiable from the inside. Someone in the midst of status decline can point to rational explanations for each behavioral change. They are not wrong about their individual justifications, but they are missing the cumulative impact of these changes on how others perceive and respond to them. The recovery process involves deliberately reversing the micro-behaviors that signal uncertainty. This feels unnatural and potentially risky because those behaviors developed as responses to real internal doubt. Returning to more declarative communication, taking up more space, and providing less justification for decisions requires rebuilding internal confidence while simultaneously projecting external certainty. The timing of this reversal is critical. Attempting to project confidence while feeling genuinely uncertain can appear inauthentic and may accelerate rather than reverse status decline. The internal work of rebuilding genuine confidence must occur alongside the external work of adjusting behavioral patterns. Some people attempt to reverse status decline through dramatic gestures or confrontational behavior, but this approach often backfires. Status is rebuilt through consistent demonstration of competence and certainty, not through aggressive assertions of authority that lack foundation in actual capability or confidence. The most effective recovery involves identifying specific areas where genuine competence and confidence exist, then gradually expanding from these strongholds. Rather than attempting to project confidence universally, someone rebuilding status focuses on situations where they can authentically demonstrate authority and capability. This requires strategic selectivity about which battles to fight and which positions to defend. The person recovering from status decline cannot afford to engage in conflicts where they lack genuine strength or knowledge. They must choose their moments carefully, speaking up only when they can contribute real value and remaining silent when they cannot. The goal is not to become arrogant or dismissive, but to return to the natural confidence that high-status individuals exhibit. This confidence expresses itself through economy of language, comfort with silence, minimal justification of decisions, and physical presence that claims rather than apologizes for space. Understanding these dynamics provides strategic advantages for those who can recognize status shifts as they occur. When someone else's status is declining, it creates opportunities to increase one's own positioning by demonstrating the confidence and decisiveness that the declining person is failing to project. When someone's own status begins to decline, early recognition allows for course correction before the pattern becomes entrenched. The specific interventions required depend on the particular behaviors that are signaling uncertainty, but the general principle involves returning to more decisive, less apologetic communication and behavior patterns.